In May 1902, the British Admiralty invited several shipbuilding yards to submit tenders for a new class of small cruiser designed to lead destroyer flotillas. These vessels needed high speed to match the destroyers' strong seaworthiness and advanced communications. But since they were meant to combat destroyer-type ships, heavy armament was not required. The Admiralty outlined general specifications, following contemporary destroyer design practices, calling for a speed of 25 knots, a range of 2,000 nautical miles, light armor, and an armament of 10 12-pounder 3-inch guns, 8 3-pounder guns, and 2 torpedo tubes. 8 scout cruisers were commissioned, with 2 each built by Armstrong Whitworth, Fairfield, Camel, Laird, and Vickers. The Pathfinder-class ships, constructed by Camel Laird, measured 379 feet 0 inches or 115.52 meters overall, and 370 feet or 112.78 meters between perpendiculars, with a beam of 38 feet 9 inches or 11.81 meters, and a draft of 15 feet 2 inches or 4.62 meters. They displaced 2,990 tons under normal load and 3,290 tons at deep load. 12 Normand water tube boilers supplied steam to 2 4-cylinder triple expansion engines, delivering 16,500 indicated horsepower to 2 shafts. Using forced draft during sea trials, the engines reached 17,582 indicated horsepower, enabling a top trial speed of 25.48 knots. The ship had a range of 3,400 nautical miles at 10 knots. A 2-inch or 51mm armor belt shielded the engine rooms, while a 3/8-inch or 9.5mm armored deck covered the engines, with additional deck armor ranging from a 1/2 inch to 1.5 inches or 13 to 38 millimeters. The conning tower featured 3-inch or 76mm thick armor for added protection. The Pathfinder class was armed with 10 quick-firing 12-pounder 3-inch 18 CWT guns. 3 were mounted side by side on both the forecastle and quarterdeck, while the other 4 were positioned amidships, 2 on each side. The ships were also equipped with 8 3-pounder Hotchkiss guns and 2 18-inch above-water torpedo tubes, 1 on each broadside. Pathfinder was built at Camel Laird's Birkenhead shipyard, with construction beginning on August 15, 1903. The ship was launched on July 16, 1904 and officially completed on July 18, 1905. Shortly after completion, 2 more 12-pounder guns were added, while the 3-pounders were replaced with 6 6-pounder guns. In 1911-12, the class was rearmed with 9 4-inch guns. Pathfinder initially served with the Atlantic Fleet, later joining the Channel Fleet in 1906 and the Home Fleet in 1907. In November 1907, Pathfinder entered dry dock at Chatham Dockyard for an inspection of her underwater fittings. By August 1909, now serving as leader of the 1st Destroyer Flotilla, Pathfinder was undergoing a refit at Sheerness. On May 23, 1914, when aviator Gustav Hammel's aircraft disappeared over the English Channel, Pathfinder, leading the 8th Destroyer Flotilla, participated in unsuccessful search efforts for the missing pilot. At the outbreak of the First World War, she remained with the 8th Destroyer Flotilla, stationed at Rosyth in the Firth of Forth under the command of Captain Francis Martin Lee. On Saturday, September 5, 1914, Pathfinder was sunk off St Abbs Head, Berwickshire, Scotland by the German U-21, commanded by Captain Lieutenant Otto Hersing. A torpedo struck the ship's magazine, triggering a massive explosion that caused her to sink within minutes, resulting in the loss of 259 men. In early September 1914, Otto Hersing, commander of U-21, sailed into the Firth of Forth, where the major British naval base at Rosyth was located. He reportedly advanced as far as the Carling Nose Battery near the Forth Bridge. At one point, his periscope was sighted, prompting the battery to open fire, but without success. During the night, Hersing withdrew from the Forth and began patrolling the coastline from the Isle of May southward. On the morning of September 5th, Hersing spotted HMS Pathfinder sailing on a south-southeast course accompanied by elements of the 8th Destroyer Flotilla. Around midday, the destroyers changed course back toward the Isle of May, while Pathfinder continued her patrol. Shortly after, Hersing sighted Pathfinder again on her return journey through his periscope and decided to launch an attack. At 15:43, U-21 launched a single 50-centimeter, 20 inches Type G6 torpedo from a distance of 2,000 yards. 2 minutes later, lookouts spotted its wake heading toward the starboard bow. Lieutenant Commander Favell, the officer of the watch, attempted evasive action by ordering the starboard engine astern, the port engine full ahead, and the wheel hard to port. However, the maneuver came too late, and the torpedo struck beneath the bridge. The explosion likely ignited cordite bags in the forward magazine, triggering a second, larger blast that obliterated everything forward of the bridge. Torn in half, Pathfinder began sinking immediately, pulling most of her crew down with her and leaving a vast plume of smoke over the site. The ship went down so rapidly that there was no time to launch lifeboats. In fact, remnants of a lifeboat davit and rope remain visible on the wreck today, serving as evidence of how swiftly the vessel was lost. One of the survivors, Acting Sub-Lieutenant Edward Oliver Sonnenschein, recounted the sinking with these words: "The ship gave a heavy lurch forward and took an angle of about 40 degrees down by the bow. Water came swirling up to the searchlight platform. The captain said, 'Jump, you devils, jump!' The captain and his secretary remained with the ship until the very end, but somehow both survived." Also among the survivors was Staff Surgeon Thomas Aubrey Smith, who lived at Bedeque House in Dromore, County Down. Recounting the experience in a letter to his mother, he said the explosion had blown a great hole in the side of the ship. "I was at the time in the wardroom but ran up on deck immediately, and it was then evident by the way the bow was down in the water that she would sink rapidly," he said. "I was then thrown forward by the slope of the deck and got jammed beneath a gun, which I expect is the cause of my bruising, and while in this position was carried down some way by the sinking ship. But fortunately, after a time I became released, and after what seemed like interminable ages, I came to the surface, and after swimming a short time I was able to get an oar and some other floating material, with the help of which I was just able to keep on the surface. After holding on for a long time, I believe it was an hour and a half, I must have become unconscious, for I have no recollection of being picked out of the water. You see, we were alone when it happened, so it took a long time for the reserve torpedo boats to come out, and it was too quick to get any of our own boats out. Besides, most of the few we had were splintered into pieces." Another of the survivors of HMS Pathfinder was Captain Francis Martin Leake, who stayed with his ship as she went down but was luckily picked up and saved. He wrote in a letter to his mother, "The torpedo got us in our forward magazine and evidently sent this up, thereby killing everyone forward," he went on. Pathfinder then fell over and disappeared, leaving a mass of wreckage all around, but I regret very few men amongst it, for at the time they were all asleep on the mess decks and the full explosion must have caught them, for no survivors came from forward. A seaman who escaped gave this account of his experiences: "I saw a flash, and the ship seemed to lift right out of the water. Down came the mast and forefunnel and forwards part of the ship. All the men there must have been blown to atoms. I bobbed down for a few seconds for fear of being hit by the debris. Some pieces of it must have weighed nearly 100 weight, which was blown sky high. I scrambled to the quarter deck, which was littered with mangled bodies, and looked about for something to cling to. The captain shouted, 'To the boats!' But there were only 2, and they were smashed. The other boats, and practically all the woodwork, had been left ashore. We fired a gun as a distress signal. By this time the ship was almost covered with water. Every man for himself, and I at once pulled off my boots, coat, and trousers, and over I went. I think I broke all swimming records trying to put as much space as possible between myself and the ship, being afraid of suction. Turning round, the last I saw of the ship about 50 yards away was the after end sticking upright in the air about 100 feet. Then it gradually heeled over towards me and sank. Then I swam again to get out of its way, thinking the end might hit me as it came down. It cleared me all right. It was all over in about 5 minutes from the start. When she sank, something blew up, and on came a wave, and round I went like a cork. A buoy came speeding by me. I grabbed it, and that was what kept me afloat. Lieutenant Stallybrass recalled that the bulkheads held firm until 5 minutes after the big explosion. The ship gave a heavy lurch forward and took an angle of about 40 degrees down by the bow. Water came swirling up to the searchlight platform. The captain said, "Jump, you devils, jump." The captain and his secretary, probably paymaster Alan Bath, remained with the ship until the very end, but somehow both survived. In his ship's log, Hersing described what happened. At around 3 p.m. in the afternoon, my second-in-command was on bridge duty and was doing a normal scan of the waters with the periscope. He noticed a British vessel called HMS Pathfinder. At the moment, we were at about 10 meters below surface and in a very vulnerable position. We believe that they noticed us because they turned around in our direction. My second-in-command immediately called upon me and I answered him speedily. I rushed to the bridge and told the helmsman to submerge. It was a British light cruiser, and it seems it was equipped with cannons and machine guns and probably depth charges. When we reached 50 meters, we fired one torpedo and destroyed the vessel. We soon surfaced and saw about 100 people. We believe there was a crew of about 600 plus people, thus this would seem that the British just had a very heavy loss of life. Fishing boats from the nearby port of Eyemouth were first to arrive, finding a sea littered with debris, fuel oil, clothing, and body parts. Meanwhile, the British destroyers HMS Stag and Express, having spotted the smoke, rushed to the scene but discovered that the few survivors had already been rescued. An anecdotal account claims that one destroyer suffered engine trouble when a water inlet was blocked by a severed leg in a sea boot. The number of survivors remains unclear. On the 6th of September, the Times reported that 58 men had been rescued, though 4 later died from their injuries. The uncertainty is compounded by the difficulty in determining how many were aboard that day. However, modern research suggests that there were likely 268 personnel on board, along with 2 civilian canteen assistants. Ultimately, only 20 survivors were officially recorded. 4 additional men succumbed to injuries or exposure and were laid to rest in Dalmeny, Fife, and Warriston near Edinburgh. An unidentified Pathfinder sailor was buried in Dunbar, overlooking the site of the sinking. British writer Aldous Huxley witnessed the explosion while staying at Northfield House, St Abbs, and later described it in a letter to his father, dated September 14, 1914. I dare say Julian told you that we actually saw the Pathfinder explosion, a great white cloud with its foot in sea. The St Abbs lifeboat came in with the most appalling accounts of the scene. There was not a piece of wood, they said, big enough to float a man, and over acres the sea was covered with fragments, human and otherwise. They brought back a sailor's cap with half a man's head inside it. The explosion must have been frightful. It is thought to be a German submarine that did it, or possibly a torpedo fired from one of the refitted German trawlers, which cruise all round painted with British port letters and flying the British flag. Although the sinking of Pathfinder was clearly visible from shore, authorities attempted to conceal that she had been sunk by a torpedo, instead claiming she had struck a mine. The reason remains uncertain, but likely stemmed from the Admiralty's stance that submarines, then a relatively new and unproven weapon, were incapable of sinking a surface warship with a torpedo. However, the Scotsman published an eyewitness account from an Eyemouth fisherman involved in the rescue, confirming rumors of a submarine attack. The Scotsman also reported inaccurately that Pathfinder had been targeted by 2 U-boats and had sunk one in her final moments. Admiralty intelligence later claimed that cruisers had cornered and destroyed the responsible U-boat. The sinking of Pathfinder alerted both sides to the serious threat submarines posed to large warships. And not only did she go down to the seabed, but she went down in history as the first warship to be sunk by a German U-boat.